Welcome back to the Pittsburgh Basketball Show. First episode here in about 1 to 2 weeks. We've got a huge guest, the man himself, Joey
I'll try and
Brackets.
get huger. How's that?
Joey Brackets, Joe Lunardi from ESPN. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure thing, George.
So, Joe, it's the middle of the summer. You are basically the biggest guest that we could get on the show in the summer. Like, this is huge. I wouldn't expect you to go on a show like this right now. But you're locked in. Like, you just told me before the show, you were talking about the Missouri Valley Conference. It's August. I love it. But let's talk some ACC basketball.
Sure.
Um, we look at your offseason prediction. You had a bracket prediction come out. The last one I saw was in July.
Ah,
So you've
there's
got a more
one
recent one.
today.
Okay, you got one today. Well, the one in July had Pitt in the last four in, I believe,
Yeah,
on the
same,
bubble for
same
sure.
today.
Same
Same
today.
today. Yep.
What goes into that?
Well, first of all, not much happens between the end of July and the end of August.
Right.
Thankfully, because let's face it, the off season is too chaotic
Mm.
now. Uh, maybe it was too easy for us in the old days of like 3 years ago. But I just think it's hard for fans, right? Like no sympathy for us. We're pursuing professionally, something that requires working, which
Right.
is okay, right? Like my dad used to say, work is a four-letter word. If it wasn't, they would call it something else. But what goes into it? Okay, I keep like a lot of people, I track rosters,
Right.
right? And I try to assign a value to the top rotation guys, 6, 7, 8, at each school that's legitimately in the hunt. I'm not saying I'm doing 362 every day of the summer, but April, May, up to the NBA draft, I was doing 162 maybe every day or every other day, tracking who's going where and why and what, coaching changes and whatever.
Right.
And realignment, a lot of big moves there this offseason. Big 10, Big 12, ACC, right? SEC. So, that's excuse me, that's a thing. And I basically have for years kind of, algorithm is probably too fancy a word, uh, because I'm really not a math guy. I know a lot of people probably don't believe that. I'm not. Uh, but I have a little bit of a proprietary system where I involve offensive and defensive values to the minutes that are returning on a team and the minutes that are lost and then replaced by either now transfers or signees, right? And I'm not adding much value for a team that signs the 600th best freshman,
Right.
but I am adding if it's the sixth, right? A lot of this is just common sense. And maybe I'm overvaluing or undervaluing an individual contributor, either a newcomer or a returnee at a different school. But, I think that in the aggregate, when you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players, you're gonna the formula is gonna be on average reasonably on target,
Right.
right? Uh, but I mean, it's a keyboard exercise, essentially. It's not let's look at basketball exercise. So thankfully, that all changes in about 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We actually get to watch games and keep score and see who's beating whom and how they're doing it, right? I mean, that's the fun part. Uh, and my off-season work is essentially a gigantic arithmetic problem,
Right.
if you will, with a little bit of, my own value judgments coming in. Like, I may think that the addition of John Calipari at Arkansas might be a little bit more valuable than if you or I, let's say, had gotten that job.
Yeah.
Right? Like last year, it was the same with Rick Pitino at St. John's. Now, I know people have ripped Cal for not advancing in the tournament in recent years, but he is still in the Hall of Fame and we're not. So
Yeah.
you have to, again, apply some common sense. So that's what I do in the off season. And I'll start paying attention now to, um, I'll start factoring in teams' non-conference schedules,
Mhm.
segue,
Oh, yeah.
and how that might impact. And I'll hear, oh, so and so really looks good at new school A.
Right.
Like I talk to coaches, I talk to people around the country. I try not to again, dunking on a walk on in practice isn't necessarily
Yeah.
right the same as dunking on Hunter Dickinson.
Mhm.
Right? It just, but, but, and now we have real exhibition games, some of which are going to be televised, so you can watch. Yogi said you learn a lot by watching, right?
Yeah.
You can observe a lot just by watching, I think he said.
So, like you said, we got a perfect segue into the non-conference schedule discussion. Last season, I believe it was on SVP's show in March. I got you quoted on this for
Uh-oh.
an article. No, it's nothing crazy. You said the single most consistent metric applied by the committee in 30 years of this is if you're on the bubble and your non-conference is really bad, you get bagged. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it is. I think that last part of it kind of summarizes what people fail to recognize with you. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not always your opinion; it's your opinion of what the committee's opinion is.
Exactly.
So I want to ask you though, like Pitt didn't have a strong non-conference last year, non-conference schedule last year. They lost to Missouri, I know, but there were teams, Iowa State, TCU, Northwestern, that also had very low non-conference strength of schedules.
Mm-hmm.
This year, Pitt goes out, schedules a noticeably tougher slate from my point of view. I think
Mm-hmm.
looking at their net rankings from the end of last season, it's about 50 spots higher. Last year was 202 going into the season. This year, I believe, around 156. Is that the right way to go about it? Should Pitt have scheduled a tougher schedule, or should they have just tried to beat all the cupcakes again?
I think they've done the right thing for this coming season. Full disclosure, uh, I spent a couple days at the ACC meetings in May at the request of Commissioner Phillips and his deputy for basketball, Paul Brazo. And I got really unfettered and, for me, unprecedented access to uh, all 18 coaches, uh, separate multi-hour sessions in which I was able to share kind of my data points and tricks of the trade, if you will. And last year's omissions, whether it was Pitt or Wake, I guess were the two most discussed. And on the other side of the coin, maybe Virginia as a questionable inclusion,
Mm,
if you're in that camp. Um, and overall, maybe at least in their mind's eye, the league's eye, a decline in kind of raw number of bids. And from my seat, uh, kind of a disturbing drop in average seed and quality over a period of years. And this we talked about on air all last winter. I mean, to go for the ACC to have three number one seeds in 2019, right? And then not have one for 5 years,
Mhm.
like, is unprecedented in my 30 years of doing this. Like, this is a league that has averaged more than one seed for 2+ decades. And you say, oh, 1-1, well, it's not that big a deal. It's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Nobody else is even close to that. And yeah, Duke, Carolina, Duke, Carolina, Duke, Carolina, but it's more than that.
Yeah.
There's been Louisville, multiple Virginias. Uh, Heck, I mean, it was Big Pitt was a one seed once
Mhm.
in my years of doing this. So you know, when that is going south, and I credit the conference for saying, hey, like, let's take a look at this. And they allowed me to say very loudly with data, you're complaining that this is a perception problem when the data clearly indicates that it is a basketball problem. This isn't a case of people in a room not recognizing that the ACC is really good. Obviously, in the tournament, they've been really, really good.
Right.
But what's a better measure of overall quality? Performance over 3 months or performance over 3 weeks when every game is kind of a coin flip? I would argue that I would be worried about continuing to bank on overachieving in the tournament. That's my take. Now, in Pitt's specific case, a little bit of bad luck in terms of, yeah, Missouri, you lose a game, they lose a guy, and then they go 0-18 in the SEC.
Yeah.
Like, like, all right, that's pretty freaking, like, you can't plan that,
Mhm.
right? Like, if that game had been replaced by, I don't know, Youngstown State, right? At the beginning of the year, we'd have been all over them for dropping Missouri.
Right. Exactly.
And then you play WVU every year, right? As you should. And then, Bob Huggins
Crashes out
maybe
the whole program.
maybe has a little problem. And a game that would normally be a lock, high-end game becomes not for a
Yeah.
year. And last year, first time ever, at least that I could find, there was a quad four team in the league, Louisville. So that's another donkey. Uh, so that's bad luck.
Yeah.
And then we have the bid stealers at at the end of championship week. And I mean, to the eye, and I'm not an eye test guy. Like, we play 35 games for a reason.
Yeah.
We should judge results more than opinions. Okay. But clearly Pitt was good enough
There you have it.
at basketball, I think.
So do you,
And
sorry to
and I
interrupt.
had, yeah, go ahead.
Do you think the process for choosing the field that the committee has is the correct one then? If you think Pitt was good enough, like at basketball?
Well, but you're assuming that if we simply decide in some mysterious way who we think or don't think is good enough, that number will correspond exactly to the number of at-large bids.
Right. You could have 80 teams who look like they're good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I don't think it is,
Mm.
but last year I thought there were 6 teams that were clearly good enough that didn't make it, and there were 5 bid stealers. And typically we have one or two.
Yeah.
So instead of one or two, man, they really could have won a couple games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Type examples. We had a handful, including Pitt. And what I would say is, like, we're going through this right now in the Lunardi household. Our oldest daughter's getting married in a couple weeks, not even.
Congratulations.
Well, but my point is, like, we're in that, like, what do we do with these couple extra seats of people who aren't coming? Right. So we have a bubble scenario right here in the kitchen. All right. So they have more, you know, family and guests for their wedding in the committee room than they have seats.
Right.
Right. Like the room's only so big. And how do you break? Like, what do you do? And what I say is, if you think you might be a bubble team, don't give them a reason. You can't, like, and Coach Capel and I had this conversation publicly in front of the others, because I warned him too. I said, you're going to get dragged, because if I don't, I'm not doing my job. But
Yeah.
then we might have at dinner had a ginger ale or two. And honest, good guy, good conversation. And he totally got it. He totally got it. I said, yeah, it was mostly bad luck, but since we can't count on good luck, we have to control the controllables, right? And a couple times in the summer, there was a back and forth with the scheduling guy. Hey, what do you think about opponent A versus
Right.
opponent B? Right? Like, instead of going and scheduling team 325, why don't we just get 225? Right? We're just not as likely, but if the one is a 95% win and the other's an 85%
Yeah.
win,
You take it.
like, don't give them a reason. And the league's going to be better, right? Like, Louisville only has one way to go,
Right.
right? And
They should
and
be pretty good. Like I think Louisville's going to be pretty solid this year too.
yeah,
It's tough
yeah,
to
we don't know
say.
about Cal's going to be respectable. Madsen's really doing a good job. They have a ways to go. Uh, I'm not. Stanford's probably a year away,
Yeah.
but he's a great coach. They'll be competitive, if only because they'll try to play 60-50,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, Andy Enfield didn't go to SMU to suck.
Yeah, they're not messing around. I like their
So,
roster too.
and the other thing that's going to help the ACC, and this is math, they were the first to be the biggest, and they lost ground numerically to the likes of the Big 12 by having more teams than was metrically optimal, if that's a term. And now it's not like the other leagues are now giving up that advantage by also being as big. Uh, and again, all of this can be proven with numbers.
Yeah.
So I fully expect the ACC to rebound, even if they're standing still, because the other power conferences, I think, have to drift a little bit as they've grown. And frankly, last year, the biggest anomaly wasn't all the bid stealers, it was the Mountain West with 6 bids.
Yeah, the Mountain West is something that gets a lot of Pitt fans
Yeah.
ticked off because of the performance in March, right? Like we
Yeah,
talked about it. You can't
but
judge
that's
the
not
whole
what
season.
you can,
Right.
except in Virginia's case. They were just bad.
Okay.
And
That's
then
gonna
they proved it.
yeah, that's gonna put some people at peace, I think, hearing you say that.
And I'm a UV, like, I'm a huge fan of them and it and the
Mhm.
whole town and the way they go. Like, I'm a fan of everything.
Yeah.
They just weren't very good at basketball.
Yeah.
Certainly the end of basketball that involves scoring.
So Joe, I know you got to get going. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Got
Thank you
it.
so much for diving in. Hopefully, we can catch up during the season.
You got
Um,
it.
and I'll see you then.
You got it, George. Thanks.
All right,
Go
Joe.
Pitt.
Thanks, man. See you
See ya.
later.